This story begins with a boy, drenched in sweat, swinging his sword over and over again under the burning sun. This boy's name is Alan, a third-year student of the Grand Fencing School. Every day, Alan poured his heart into mastering the sword. Today was no different, until two boys noticed him and immediately burst into laughter. They called him Alan the Failed Swordsman and said his swordsmanship was the worst in the entire school. Alan thought this was just another bad day. He couldn't have been more wrong. In truth, Alan wasn't very good with the sword. Because of that, the boys didn't just stop at insults. They threw a plastic bottle at Alan's head and laughed. Then they asked Alan to take his trashy swordsmanship somewhere else. Alan was miserable. He felt like a total loser. But then he agreed to leave, just as the boys had asked. At the academy, everyone made fun of Alan because of his lack of strength. They even gave him an embarrassing nickname, the Failed Swordsman. Ever since he was a boy, Alan had dreamt of becoming the perfect swordsman. His mother believed in that dream. She sacrificed everything for it, saving every coin to pay the sky-high tuition fees of the fencing academy. She went hungry some days, just so Alan could eat. She gave everything, so her son could chase his dream. Because of that, Alan swore he would become a great swordsman and return the favor to his beloved mom. That was why Alan trained hard, no matter what anybody said, and refused to give up. After training hard that day, some over-pampered brat with two chicks leeching onto him like parasites noticed Alan and called him a loser. That wasn't all. The brat, named Doriel, who was the golden boy of the school, said he felt sorry for Alan because, even though Alan trained so hard, all his efforts were a total waste. Alan tried to ignore him. He really did. But when Doriel kept going, Alan turned to face him. Doriel said he could see how much Alan was struggling, and that's why he would give Alan a piece of advice. He asked Alan to just quit, since it was clear to everyone that Alan had no talent and no future wielding a sword. Alan tried hard to control himself and dismissed Doriel. But then Doriel crossed a line. Doriel said he couldn't understand how Alan's parents could even birth someone so trashy who couldn't use a sword. He added that the only reason Alan's parents could have birthed trash was simply because they were trash themselves. Alan heard those words, and something snapped within him. He became furious and demanded that Doriel take back his words immediately. Alan shouted that Doriel could insult him all he wanted, but he would never allow anyone to insult his mother, the woman who took care of him and sacrificed everything for him. But instead of apologizing, Doriel just smiled smugly and said that trash would always be trash. He added that Alan would always remain the son of trash, no matter how hard he tried. That was it. Alan could no longer control himself. With his blood boiling, he charged at Doriel with his sword, aiming to shut his useless mouth permanently. Unfortunately, before he could land a strike, Doriel kicked him in the gut, called him a failure, and warned him not to come close. Alan staggered to the ground, mucus spilling from his mouth and nose. He held his stomach in pain, but still clutched his sword tightly. Alan was not done. He still couldn't bear Doriel insulting his mother. Without thinking, Alan stood up, shaking with rage and shame, and challenged Doriel to a duel. Everyone was shocked. Doriel was surprised and amused at the same time. When Doriel jokingly asked if the most pathetic swordsman in the entire school was challenging him, the master swordsman of the school, to a duel, Alan emphatically said yes. Alan declared that he would win the duel, and when he did, Doriel would have to withdraw every insult he had said about his parents. This made Doriel laugh even harder. Doriel called Alan a comedian and then said he must be out of his mind. But after some thought, Doriel agreed to the condition, and even said if Alan somehow won, he would bow to him. But then Doriel coldly laid down his own condition. If Alan lost, he would leave the school indefinitely. Alan was shocked. He hadn't expected such a brutal condition from Doriel. Alan quickly protested that Doriel's condition wasn't of equal value. But Doriel only smirked and said Alan still didn't understand that his leaving the school had no value to him, because Alan was nothing but worthless trash. Even though the condition was very difficult, considering how much his mother had sacrificed to send him to the school, Alan chose to accept the challenge along with the condition. Little did Alan know that accepting Doriel's challenge would change his destiny forever. From that day onward, Alan rushed to the hostel after school every day to train for his duel with Doriel. The days flew by. With only one day left before the duel, Alan pushed himself harder than ever. Apart from winning the duel, he didn't want to waste the chance he had to attend such an expensive fencing school, for which his mother had sacrificed so much. But reality was brutal. Doriel wasn't just talented, he was a monster. This dude could truly be called a fencing master, and that was no exaggeration. In just 1 year, Doriel became an expert-level student and had never lost to anyone in the school. All Alan wanted was to fight him and win, to make Doriel eat back his words. But then came the big question: could Alan win? As self-doubt started to creep in, Alan tried to brush it off. He knew Doriel was 100 times stronger than he was, but he wanted so badly to make him regret insulting his mother. As the day quickly came to an end, Alan continued his relentless practice with his sword. As he slashed through bushes, the self-doubt returned, this time even stronger. Alan realized there was something missing from his training: strength. Even though he wished to defeat Doriel, Alan wept bitterly, feeling he simply wasn't strong enough. Suddenly, at that precise moment, while Alan was on the ground weeping, someone called him young swordsman and then told him not to give up. It turned out to be a very old man with a long white flowing beard, who asked Alan what was troubling him. Alan looked up, shocked. He demanded to know who the old man was and what he wanted. But the old man simply told Alan to call him the Hermit of Time. The old man sat beside Alan and insisted on having a heart-to-heart talk. Though Alan was at first suspicious, he found himself pouring out everything about Doriel, about his mother, about the impossible duel. Alan even told him how Doriel had called his mother trash and about the ridiculous conditions set for the duel. The old man listened attentively and then assured Alan that he had the perfect solution to make him strong. The old man then pulled out a strange device, a metallic object with a glowing red button at the top. The old man explained that the button was called the Million Years Button. By pressing it, Alan would be transported to a different world where he could spend 1,000,000 years training, without the fear of time or aging. The old man added that Alan would be given a house as a gift, along with an unlimited supply of delicious food. After listening to the crazy talk, Alan assumed the man must have escaped from an asylum. He dismissed the old geezer and continued his training. But the old man didn't stop. He continued pestering Alan with promises of 1,000,000-year training without time passing in the real world. Finally, the old man pleaded for Alan to press the button just once, just for a trial. Alan paused. He thought deeply about the old man's words. Even though he was skeptical, he figured he had nothing to lose. If there was even a 1 in a million chance to win, he had to take it. With trembling hands, Alan raised his finger and then pressed the big red button. Instantly, a blinding white light swallowed him whole. Alan opened his eyes to find himself standing atop a high building that scraped the heavens. The sky above was a swirling sea of silver and blue, and the air crackled with an energy he had never felt before. He looked around and wondered where the heck he was. Alan noticed he was standing on top of a white building. He was still confused about what was going on. He looked to the sky and noticed something very strange. There was no sun, even though everywhere was as bright as day. Despite the abundant light, Alan realized he couldn't see his own shadow, or even the shadow of any object. Then he spotted it, something floating in the sky. A timer. Alan figured it must be the clock the old man had mentioned, the one that would keep ticking until 100 million years had passed. He was thrilled. Everything was just as the old man had said. If he could train for even a fraction of that time, he knew he'd have a real chance at defeating Doriel. With a renewed sense of purpose, Alan dove right into his training, determined to make use of every second. After several hours of relentless sword practice, hunger gnawed at his stomach, and he decided to explore the white building. Upon entering, he was shocked at how luxurious and big it was. He could not believe that the place was his crib. Overly excited, he decided to give himself a tour around the house until he stumbled into a state-of-the-art kitchen. Though unfamiliar with most of the cooking utensils, he opened a cupboard he assumed was the pantry and gasped. It was filled with fresh fruits. He immediately picked up a bright red apple and took a bite. His face flushed. The apple was sweet, juicy, and crisp. The taste was unlike anything he'd ever had. Alan then decided to taste the rest of the fruits inside the pantry. After eating like a glutton, our boy decided to have a bath. He entered the bathroom and was shocked to see how big it was, like something from a royal palace. He immediately jumped into the bathtub and felt refreshed. The water was warm, just as if it had been prepared waiting for him. After bathing, Alan decided to rest for the day on the nice, comfy king-sized bed. He was really happy with the training place and felt that if he trained there for 1,000,000 years, there was no way he wouldn't become a great swordsman. 10 years passed in a flash. Alan trained daily, mastering the basics of fencing. He learned to overcome fatigue quickly, to transfer power from his feet and hips, and to maintain balance with precision. 100 years later, he was something else entirely. His swordsmanship had evolved to the point where he could invent new movements and name them. He was developing his own style. After 1,000 years, cracks began to form. Alan was tired. He had practiced swordsmanship for so long that he began to feel hollow. For the first time, he felt lonely and began thinking about his mother. He could only hope she was okay. 2,000 years slipped by, and food lost its flavor. Everything he ate tasted like ash or stone. This angered him. He was frustrated, but still, Alan would not stop training. 5,000 years passed, and Alan had spent all that time training. But desperate questions lingered in his mind. First, had time truly stopped in the other world? Second, was he really getting stronger, or had he been wasting his time? Lastly, when he woke up, would he forget everything he had learned? 7,000 years. Alan broke down, tears mixing with sweat. He'd forgotten why he trained so hard, why he kept torturing himself. But as he clutched his blade tightly, he remembered everyone calling him a failed swordsman. He recalled Doriel's face and the harsh insults he had endured. This fueled Alan's resolve to continue training so he could defeat Doriel. 10,000 years passed, and Alan learned a new training method, fighting against himself. He would spar against his own shadow for hours. It was a perpetual war, one with no end. There was usually no winner, but after every battle, Alan always felt like he had grown as a person. But even with all this, Alan still wasn't sure he could defeat Doriel. Doriel was a sword genius, the kind that only appeared once every 100 years. He was also a disciple of the famous fencing style Shiguryu, and even among its practitioners, Doriel was considered one of the best. Knowing this, Alan couldn't help but think that without some special talent or skill, there was no way he could ever beat Doriel. Then, at last, the timer ticked its final second. Alan stared at the timer in the sky and realized he had spent 100 million years in the strange world, honing his swordsmanship skills. But Alan was saddened, despite everything. He still hadn't found that special talent that made the real difference. Suddenly, the world around him shattered like glass. When he opened his eyes, Alan found himself standing in the middle of the forest, just behind his hostel. The old man standing beside him asked how his 100 million years of training had gone. Alan replied that he still didn't feel anything extraordinary. But the old man said, "To see is to believe," and urged Alan to wield his sword. Alan obeyed, and as he grabbed the hilt, he felt something strange. It was as if his hands were driven by a force inside him. Without hesitation, his hand instinctively pulled the blade from its sheath. With just one swing, the air backlash was sharp enough to slice through leaves. Alan could not believe it. He had thought it was all a dream. He assumed a fencing stance, and as he struck the ground with his blade, there was a massive explosion that rocked the earth. Alan was delighted. He told the old man he had been right. He had really become a very strong swordsman. But then again, self-doubt crept in. Was it enough to beat Doriel? He remembered Doriel's long line of predecessors, swordmasters who had invented lethal techniques after years of fighting and training. Alan reasoned that to defeat someone like Doriel, he would need a lot of talent and some special skill. But he didn't have those. He begged the old man to let him press the 100 million year button again so he could train even more in the strange world. The old man sighed deeply and agreed. He assured Alan that he could press the button as many times as he liked. This made Alan really excited. He hadn't expected such a response. He hurriedly thanked the old man and pressed the big red button. But this time, he blacked out. When he eventually woke up, he heard a voice shouting for him to get off the grass. Dizzy and disoriented, Alan struggled to move. The voice grew louder and angrier, shouting his name and forcing him to jerk up. It turned out to be the hostel master, a she-hulk named Dora, who demanded to know why he was sleeping in the bush. Still confused and embarrassed, Alan immediately apologized and claimed he didn't remember what had happened the day before. Dora accepted the apology and ordered him to return to the hostel. She also told him to make sure he ate breakfast so she wouldn't have to throw food away like usual. But Alan didn't hear a word. He was more concerned about whether everything with the old man had really happened, or if it had all been a dream. Accidentally, his eyes glanced to the side, and he saw it, the million-year button lying on the ground. Alan froze. That meant it hadn't been a dream after all. Nervously, he picked up the button. But when he pressed it a few times, nothing happened. Disappointed, Alan tossed the button to the ground and dismissed everything as just one big bad nightmare. As Dora called out again, Alan rushed to meet her and started running back to the hostel. Unbeknownst to him, the big red button had been damaged from the fall. Shortly afterward, Alan reached the hostel. After breakfast, Dora reminded him it was past 7 am and asked if he didn't have any classes. This made Alan remember his duel with Doriel at 9 that morning. He was very late. Even if he ran as fast as Usain Bolt on Red Bull, it would still take 3 hours to reach school. He would never make it on time. But he had to try. Standing up from the dining table, he hurriedly informed Dora he was heading to school. Then, he dashed out of the hostel and started running. Alan thought he was just running at a normal pace. Little did he know he was sprinting at the speed of light. Alan finally got to school. As he rushed to the dojo reception, he explained that he had a duel with Doriel scheduled for 9 o'clock and apologized for being late. However, the dude at the reception told him he had arrived just in time. There was still an hour left before the fight. Alan was shocked to hear this, but the guy showed him a wall clock, proving that it was indeed 8 o'clock. With time to spare, Alan made his way to the school dojo, though he still found it hard to believe he had managed to arrive just in time. Soon, he reached the entrance of the dojo, ready to finally end this. He entered the hallway, but suddenly, his feet froze. His heart began to race. He was nervous. To psych himself up, he slapped his face multiple times, trying to build motivation. He knew that in this fight, he would need to focus all his strength and stand up to Doriel with everything he had learned so far. Yet his hand trembled as he reached for the door handle. Alan took a deep breath, then finally summoned enough courage to pull the door open. As he stepped into the auditorium, he received the shock of his life. The place was packed with hundreds of students chanting his nickname, the failed swordsman. They insulted him, calling him the worst swordsman in the school, and said the day had finally come for him to disappear forever. Alan was completely embarrassed and terrified at the same time. As he walked slowly to the center, eyes burned into him from every direction. The insults from the students didn't stop. They continued to clamor for Doriel to destroy him. Standing opposite Alan was Doriel, confident, cruel, and smirking like a comic book villain. As Doriel strolled proudly toward Alan, he told Alan that he appreciated his courage for showing up instead of running away like a coward. When Alan demanded to know why the auditorium was packed with so many students, Doriel claimed it wasn't his doing. He said he was surprised too and lied that someone else must have tipped everyone off about the duel. This only made Alan angrier. He could tell Doriel was lying through his teeth. Alan knew it had been his plan all along. Doriel wanted to humiliate him in front of everyone. Surely, Alan thought, the school would never allow something like this to happen. But he was dead wrong. The students kept mocking him, calling him a failure and urging Doriel to beat him black and blue. They even mocked the fact that he trained every day, calling him an idiot for it. Suddenly, the officiating supervisor entered the auditorium to begin the duel. So Alan rushed over to the teacher, trying to report the situation and the crowd's mockery. But the teacher dismissed his complaints and announced the start of the duel. Alan was stunned. He couldn't believe the teacher wasn't going to do anything. He clenched his fists in frustration and anger. It was now painfully clear. Even the school was against him. As the duel began, Doriel swore he would make Alan suffer and beg for mercy. But Alan was determined to fight, for all the times he had been mocked. As the fight started, self-doubt crept in again. Alan wasn't sure he could win, but it was too late to back down now. He noticed Doriel had already taken an aggressive stance, preparing to attack head-on. So Alan came up with the perfect plan: dodge all of Doriel's attacks at first, and once he started to tire, strike at every opening. At that moment, Doriel charged at him, fully confident he could land a hit. Not only that, Doriel activated his Shigaryu speed fire attack, allowing him to strike at 10 times his normal speed. But Alan was faster. Alan dodged left, ducked low, twisted just out of reach and dodged every strike. The crowd gasped. Doriel's smirk vanished. Doriel was shocked. He hadn't expected that. This was the first time Alan had ever evaded his attacks. Still, Doriel was confident his next move would finish Alan. He unleashed his secret technique, the Eternal Break, which not only increased his speed, but also improved the accuracy of his strikes. As Doriel charged again, Alan waited patiently. Alan noticed Doriel had gotten even faster, but Alan wasn't about to let this arrogant brat keep mocking others. He raised his blade vertically, ready for whatever was coming. But before Doriel could even land a strike, Alan moved. In a blur, Alan's sword cut through the air and struck Doriel's chest with such force that Doriel was sent crashing into the walls of the dojo. The entire auditorium fell silent as Doriel slumped to the ground, defeated. Everyone stood from their seats, unable to believe what had just happened. Even Alan was stunned. He couldn't believe that a single strike from him had that much power. At that moment, Alan realized that all those years spent training in the strange world had truly paid off. The biased teacher reluctantly announced the end of the duel and declared Alan the winner. As Alan heard the words, it felt just like a dream. Several days passed after the duel, and things around the school had changed a bit. Everyone now looked at Alan a little differently. The students refused to believe that Alan had defeated Doriel fairly and square. There was even a rumor circulating that Alan had cheated during the duel. Because of that, the students now hated Alan even more. Two boys even hurled a bottle of water at Alan while he was training alone. But to their surprise, Alan instinctively used his sword and deflected the bottle, sending it flying back and smashing one of the idiots in the face. Alan was no longer the weakling he used to be, so no one dared insult him to his face anymore. Instead, they preferred trash talking him behind his back. While walking to the hostel that day, Alan heard students whispering that he had tainted the school's image by using dirty tricks to win the duel. Situations like this could have broken him, but after enduring hundreds of millions of years, he couldn't care less. Alan noticed a boy and his mother strolling happily along the road, which made him think of his own mom. When he was a baby, his father had died from a terrible epidemic, and from that moment on, his mother worked every day and took care of him all by herself. Alan missed his mom, so he decided he would go home for the next vacation. He reasoned it would be nice to bring her something sweet, since it had been a while since he'd last seen her. But there was a serious problem. He was too broke even to pay attention. He had only a few coins in his pouch, barely enough to buy a word of prayer. It was clear, bro needed a job, and he needed one badly. When he got to the hostel, Dora informed him that she knew the perfect place where he could make some cool cash. Alan was excited to hear this and quickly begged her to tell him more. Dora showed him a flyer and said the event was called the Tournament of Swords. She explained that this tournament for swordsmen was held once a month. Dora added that all Alan needed was to believe in himself, as the tournament involved competitors fighting to showcase their sword skills. She then revealed that the champion would be awarded an exceptional prize, but warned that only a great warrior could earn such a prestigious reward. Alan looked at the flyer, and after hearing everything Dora had to say, he was totally interested. He reasoned that even if placing first might be difficult, he was confident he could win a few matches. Alan told Dora it was a brilliant idea, but there was still one major problem: the entry fee. To register for the competition, he would need to pay 1,000 gold coins. But Dora immediately whipped out a gold note and said she would help Alan with the fee. Alan was shocked. He hadn't expected that. Dora then mentioned a condition. In exchange for the money, Alan had to promise he'd try his best in the competition. Alan accepted the money, then paused to think deeply about Dora's proposition. After a moment, he thanked her and excitedly assured her that he would win the grand prize. A few days later, Alan traveled to the big city and began searching for the competition venue using the flyer Dora had given him. After walking for a while, he spotted a turn that, according to the flyer, was supposed to lead to the location. He went right in. Immediately, he bumped into a group of jacked men with hard faces, a clear confirmation he was in the right place. Alan started to get nervous. Without a doubt, everyone there looked like a far better swordsman than he was. He felt maybe he'd been too optimistic thinking he could win the tournament. Still, he decided to go ahead with the first step: registration. Just then, a bulky dude smacked him on the back and sneered that the tournament wasn't a place for brats. Alan flinched a little as he stared at the meathead, who was now flanked by a few girls. The girls laughed at Alan, calling him weak. The buff guy mocked him further, saying Alan must have come to compete just because he had a sword on his hip. They all laughed and told Alan he didn't stand a chance in a tournament like this. Alan didn't say a word, but his facial expression made it clear he was disgusted by their rude remarks. The big guy noticed Alan staring at him in a weird way and asked if he wanted a fight. Alan was tempted, especially since the guy had hit him first, but he reconsidered. Getting into a fight might get him disqualified from entering the tournament, so he bowed his head respectfully and apologized. Alan didn't want to disappoint Dora, who had placed so much hope in him, so he chose to walk away, even though the dude called him a loser for doing so. Alan ignored the insult and was glad he hadn't gotten into trouble. He continued looking for the registration desk and eventually found it. He walked over and told the receptionist he wanted to register. She asked for the 1,000 gold coins, and Alan gently handed the money to her. Then she asked for his name and the sword style he would be using in the tournament. Alan gave his name but hesitated on the sword style. After thinking for a while and failing to come up with a proper name, he told her he'd be using his own style. The receptionist burst into laughter. She'd never heard anyone say they had their own style before. Alan felt a little embarrassed. He thought only someone crazy would claim to have a style. But he shrugged it off and tried to focus on the competition. He looked at the clock on a nearby iron post and, seeing he still had time before the tournament began, decided to get in some practice. The area was crowded, so Alan searched for a secluded spot where he could train unseen. As he walked, he passed by a gorgeous blonde and was immediately captivated by her beauty. She was the hottest girl he had ever seen in his life. But something felt off. Alan couldn't help but wonder what a smoking slay queen like her was doing at such a brutal tournament. Before the tournament even began, a girl in a sleek black jacket and glasses arrived on the scene. Her name was Leia, and she was no ordinary spectator. She was here to scout the next great swordsman. As the crowd settled, the tournament kicked off with a dramatic entrance from the event's mayor, a bald man named Orbis, who stepped up to address the audience. After dragging them through a long-winded speech, Orbis suddenly roared, asking the crowd if they were ready to see blood. In the middle of the crowd stood Alan. Hearing the roar of the bloodthirsty audience sent a chill down his spine. The energy was intense. The fighters around him were wild, hungry for violence, and for a moment, Alan felt like prey thrown into a den of lions. Once the crowd had settled, Orbis turned to Leia and offered a brief apology for the delay. But then, with curiosity in his voice, he asked why someone as legendary as Leia, the president of the Academy of 1,000 Swords, had suddenly decided to show up at this low-profile tournament. Leia was no ordinary figure. She was one of the 5 great masters. Every swordsman who mattered knew her name. She held immense authority and influence in the world of swordsmanship. She simply replied that she had come to watch the tournament as a headhunter. Orbis nodded, understanding, but he pressed further, guessing that she must have her eyes on last month's grand prize winner. Leia smirked and admitted he was right. She pointed out that the grand prize winner, Rose Valencia, was indeed one of the competitors she would be looking out for. However, Leia also mentioned that she was hopeful of finding some hidden gem among the participants. Hours passed, and the tournament finally went into full swing. The master of ceremonies, Fina, welcomed everyone with excitement and laid down the rules. It was simple, one-on-one combat. A contestant would win either when their opponent was unable to continue the fight or was thrown out of the arena. However, she warned that taking an opponent's life was strictly forbidden, and anyone who violated that rule would be instantly disqualified. Alan heard the rules loud and clear. To him, they were pretty simple. But what came next caught him off guard. Fina then inserted her hand into a ballot box and announced that she was about to pick the first competitors to open the tournament. She pulled out a paper from the box and declared that the first match would be Bubble Domingo versus Alan. Alan froze upon hearing his name. He had hoped to watch at least one match before stepping into the spotlight. But there was no turning back now. As he stepped onto the arena stage, he was met by none other than Bubble, the same bulky, arrogant guy who had pushed him around earlier. Bubble called Alan a brat and threatened to smash his face in. Bubble also commented that it was foolish for someone like Alan to enter such a brutal tournament. Alan stood frozen. His nerves flared up. It was really him. The same guy from before. Just then, Fina stepped in again. She shared intel on the two fighters. Bubble, she explained, was a user of the Congo sword style, an ancient, destructive technique known for its raw power. One swing, she said, could tear an opponent to pieces. Then she turned to Alan. Fina mentioned that Alan didn't use any recognized style, but apparently he made up his own. This statement made the entire arena burst into laughter. The other rough-looking fighters were so amused that they immediately began mocking Alan loudly. They shouted that Bubble was lucky to be paired against such a little ant. As expected, their insults and jeers only fueled Bubble's confidence even more. Bubble then smugly told Alan that fighting him felt more like abuse. Those words hit Alan hard. Doubt crept in. Maybe he wasn't cut out for this. Maybe he was only strong compared to the others at his school. But here, surrounded by real fighters, was he just a joke? Still, Alan tried to shake off the doubt by focusing less on the outcome and more on fighting with everything he had. With this mindset, Alan bowed and said he was ready to fight. Meanwhile, up in the stands, Leia watched closely. Even in this high-pressure moment, she noticed Alan wasn't backing down. That alone was impressive to her. With both fighters ready, Fina announced the start of the match. Alan didn't hesitate. He unsheathed his sword in one smooth motion. Bubble, confident as ever, drew his blade and confidently assured Alan that he'd go easy on him. After training for what felt like 100 million years, this was the moment for Alan to prove whether he was truly good with a sword against a formidable fighter. Alan was determined to find out. He devised a strategy to attack before Bubble could react. With his blade held high, Alan prepared the very first move he had ever created. He called it one sword style. He slashed the air with all his might, channeling his energy through the wind itself. A sudden shockwave burst from the swing. In an instant, the wind collided with Bubble like a hammer. The force was so intense that it knocked out one of his teeth and shook the entire arena. Bubble collapsed to the ground. Everyone was stunned. The crowd fell silent. Even Alan couldn't believe his eyes. People in the auditorium began murmuring, asking what had just happened. But no one could give an answer, as it had all happened so fast. Rose, who had witnessed everything, found it all incredibly interesting. Finer raised Alan's hand and declared him the winner of the duel, but not without making one thing clear. No one could have seen that outcome coming. The crowd buzzed in disbelief. The little swordsman had taken the victory with just one strike. With his hand being held high by Fina, Alan was still in shock. He found it unreal that his strike could have so much force. He felt that he might truly be way stronger than he'd ever thought. After that first win against Bubble, Alan went on an unstoppable streak. Fight after fight, he dominated with overwhelming strength. 5 fights, 5 wins. Not even in his wildest dreams had he imagined pulling off something like this. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for, the final match. Fina announced the final match of the tournament, and only 2 swordsmen were left standing. First, there was the dazzling and powerful Rose Valencia. No introduction was needed, but Fina gave one anyway. Rose was the heir to a legendary and secret sword style, the Okado fighting style, and with it, she had danced her way through the tournament with elegance and precision. Fina also introduced Alan again, but this time she warned the crowd that the little guy should not be underestimated. And the crowd agreed. After what they'd witnessed, they were chanting Alan's name. Some even shouted that they wanted to become his disciples. It was all so new to Alan, he'd never been praised like this before. But now wasn't the time to get lost in the moment. He had one last battle to fight. Alan bowed his head respectfully to his formidable opponent and said it was a pleasure to cross swords with her. Rose did the same in the spirit of swordsmanship and said the pleasure was hers. Alan was impressed. It was his first time seeing Rose in person, but her name rang through every corner of the sword world. The name Rose Valencia was truly famous. Her remarkable achievements and reputation preceded her. As a profession, she was a bounty hunter who had captured dangerous criminals and handed them over to the Holy Knights. Her skill was undeniably incredible. Even with her petite body, she had been able to defeat opponents twice, sometimes 3 times her size. Alan knew he had to be careful. From what he'd seen, Rose's style relied heavily on counters. So, rushing in blindly without thinking would be worthless against such an opponent. Then, it began. Fina signaled the start of the final match. Both fighters unsheathed their blades in one fluid motion. But instead of striking, they paused, measuring each other, reading each other's intent. Alan moved first. He activated his flying shadow technique. For this technique, Alan had to close his eyes and envision Rose's attacks. He tried to visualize her movements, to feel the flow of the battle before it began. Suddenly, Rose charged. Blade outstretched, silent and swift. But Alan waited patiently. Mid-charge, Rose activated her Okado-style move known as Sakura Flash. This powerful attack sent a massive whirlwind toward Alan. But Alan stood his ground, eyes still closed. And with one clean motion, he deflected the attack. Rose's eyes widened. That wasn't supposed to happen. At that moment, Alan saw an opening and decided to take his chance. He tried stabbing Rose in the gut, but Rose sidestepped and blocked it cleanly with her blade. Rose immediately countered by unleashing another of her Okado techniques. Alan managed to parry the counter, though he was incredibly impressed by how Rose moved. The fight was intense, with both fighters clashing blades fiercely like seasoned warriors. The crowd was on the edge of their seats. It was a battle of titans, every strike, every dodge, perfectly timed and calculated. And to their shock, the reigning champion, Rose Valencia herself, was struggling against the little guy. The clash dragged on, muscles aching, breaths growing heavier. Rose was clearly tiring. This wasn't the battle she expected. Frustrated, she snapped, demanding to know where Alan had learned to use a sword like a seasoned samurai. Alan was surprised by the question. He stammered a little before answering that he was self-taught. Rose didn't believe him. She said he was capping and pointed out that in his swordplay, she could see tremendous dedication and experience. Rose added that behind every strike Alan unleashed, she could sense the weight of many years of training. Alan didn't say a word, but deep down, he knew there was no lie in what Rose had said. Rose mistook Alan's silence as him playing dumb and felt disrespected. She grew angry and swore that, as the rightful successor of the Okado style passed down through generations, she would definitely win the fight. To win, Rose unleashed the deadliest Okado style, the Sakura Mirror Slash. She dashed toward Alan like a blur of cherry blossoms and steel. Alan froze. He didn't know the name of her technique, but he could tell it involved 8 consecutive slashes, and that alone made it insanely dangerous. So, Alan braced himself. But then he noticed something. Rose wasn't quite there yet. She hadn't mastered chaining all 8 strikes. Between each attack, there was a loophole, a millisecond of vulnerability. A gap just wide enough for someone like Alan to sneak through, and Alan was more than ready to exploit it. With that, Alan decided to use a technique of his own, one he had developed, which was almost similar to Rose's. His technique also consisted of 8 slashes. However, his style of execution was completely different. During his attack, Alan never left any gaps in his defense. Meanwhile, Rose was ready to end Alan with her powerful technique, but Alan had other plans. Alan was ready to strike 8 times in a single, unbroken motion, using every ounce of strength in his arm. And then, it happened. The two fighters collided. Blades flashed. 8 slashes versus 8 slashes. The arena held its breath. Then something unexpected happened. Alan smartly evaded Rose's attack. She was shocked to her core. To her, such a feat was impossible. It had never happened before. But that wasn't all. Alan took advantage of the openings in her technique and expertly sliced through her midsection. The cut was deep. Rose collapsed to her knees and then dropped to the ground. Fina, the referee, held the microphone in stunned silence. She was speechless. Eventually, she regained her composure and declared Alan the winner. She announced that the little swordsman who had brought his own style to the tournament had won the great competition. At first, the crowd was silent. Then, suddenly, the entire arena erupted with cheers for the little swordsman. People rushed to the podium and lifted Alan up, tossing him into the air like a duffel bag while chanting his name and singing his praises. A few days after the tournament, Alan's situation was about to change. Alan was called to the principal's office. He had no idea why, though he suspected it might be punishment because of a rumor circulating the school, that he had cheated during his duel with Doriel. However, to his surprise, the principal welcomed him warmly, even offering him a cup of tea. Confused, Alan asked what this was about. The principal responded excitedly. He revealed that the school had received a recommendation letter from another institution that wanted Alan to study there. Alan was stunned. He hadn't expected such news. The principal went on to say that the letter had come from the Academy of 1,000 Swords. Alan said nothing, listening attentively as the old man continued. Thrilled, the principal explained that it was a great honor for their school to have one of its students admitted to such a prestigious academy. Then, another teacher, tall, awkward, and built like a human lamppost, chimed in and also tried to convince Alan to join the academy. But he only made things worse by claiming that the school had always believed in him. That set Alan off. Because he remembered. He remembered how everyone at the school had bullied him in one way or another. Now, just because of a recommendation, their attitude had suddenly changed. Alan was already angry. So, politely, he apologized if what he was about to say might sound disrespectful. He told the principal he needed more time to think about it. This made the principal furious. He shouted at Alan, saying there was nothing to think about, and angrily demanded to know if Alan intended to reject an offer from such a prestigious academy. Alan respectfully replied that he hadn't yet decided whether he wanted to become a holy knight or a dark swordsman. So, he still had a lot to consider. Furthermore, Alan said he wanted to go home and talk with his mother to get her advice on this life-changing decision. The principal and the electric pole man tried everything to pressure Alan to accept immediately, but Alan didn't budge. A few days later, Alan was ready to go home to his mom. When Dora reminded him not to forget the sweets he'd bought for his mom, Alan smiled and reassured her it was all packed. Dora then wished him a safe journey and told him to be careful. Alan thanked her and headed out of the hostel. He decided to run all the way to his village, so he did a short warm-up. Once finished, he sprinted south. After dashing through dense forest and leaping over fallen trees, Alan could tell that he had become incredibly fast. After several hours of intense running, he finally arrived at his village, Goza village. As he walked through the village, memories of the past flooded his mind. It had been 3 years since he last set foot there, and returning filled him with deep nostalgia. Suddenly, a bald man puffing on a cancer stick caught sight of him. Through the chimney he called a mouth. He happily shouted Alan's name. Alan turned and, upon seeing the old smoker, called him Takeji and ran over joyfully. Takeji was over the moon. He complimented Alan on how much he had grown since the last time he'd seen him. When Alan had still been a rugrat, Alan didn't have much time to chat. All he wanted was to see his mom, so he thanked Takeji and bid the old smoker goodbye. When Alan arrived at his home, he joyfully opened the door and called out for his mother. His mom turned around, and when she saw Alan, she teared up from happiness. She ran to him, hugging him tight, unable to believe her boy was finally home. His mom also complimented how much he'd grown and told him that food would be ready soon. Alan offered to help with the food, and as they prepared the meal, Alan shared everything that had happened in his life with his mom. The tournament, the victory, and finally the important decision he needed to make. His mother noticed the serious expression on his face and immediately guessed it was about his future. She asked if he was worried. Alan said yes. Alan explained that he was torn between becoming a holy knight, a swordsman, or joining the Academy of 1,000 Swords. His mom listened attentively. When he finished, she told him the choice was simple. She said she could tell that he truly wanted to go to the academy. Alan froze. He asked how she knew. His mom laughed and then reminded him that she was his mother and couldn't be fooled. Then, she reminded him that ever since he was a little boy, he had always dreamed of becoming a great swordsman and loved practicing with the sword. Alan reflected deeply on her words. But his mom gently grabbed his head and told him that she would support whatever decision he made, as long as it made him happy. Alan was relieved to hear this. It felt like a huge burden had been lifted off his shoulders, so he thanked her. Soon after, his mom said it was time to eat. She carried over a pot of stew and excitedly told Alan that it was his favorite. Little did Alan's mom know that something weird was going to happen that night. That night, after they had finished eating, a bright light suddenly appeared in the house. Out of nowhere, the creepy old hermit of time appeared, sitting on the dining table, and complimented the stew. Alan's mom was terrified, but shockingly, she already knew who the old man was. Meanwhile, Alan was enjoying the time of his life in the bathtub. The water was warm, soothing, and honestly, he was loving every second of it. As he soaked in the comfort, his thoughts drifted to his mom. After seeing her for the first time in ages, it hit him. She was getting old. And that realization, it lit a fire under him. He had to finish school fast, so she could see him become a great swordsman before she kicked the bucket. As Alan relaxed in the tub, a serious tension was brewing between his mom, Daria, and the old hermit of time. While sipping soup, the old hermit told Alan's mom he was quite impressed with how well she had hidden Alan from him all these years. He said that thanks to her efforts, it had been very difficult for him to find the boy. This made Alan's mom furious. She angrily demanded that the old man leave Alan alone and then tried to punch him. But the old man turned invisible, and her punch went right through him, smashing the table in front of him. The old man acted like nothing had just happened. He finished the soup, thanked Daria for the lovely meal, and then vanished, promising they would see each other again pretty soon. Daria stood there, watching him disappear, jaw clenched, her blood boiling. Suddenly, Takeji burst into the house. Panicking, he asked Daria if the old man had really been there. Daria replied that he was too late. The old man was already gone. Still frantic, Takeji said the old man must have used the device to appear in the house. Daria confirmed it, saying it seemed like he had used the 100 million years button. Takeji was shocked and confused. He asked how it was possible the Hermit of Time had found Alan, considering the seal was perfect. Daria pondered for a moment and then said the only explanation was that Alan must have experienced a situation that affected him emotionally. But then she also pointed out that whenever she read Alan's letters from school, he always said everything was fine and that he was having fun. Takeji found it strange. Something didn't add up. Takeji then mentioned that, with everything going on, it seemed the Hermit of Time was doing whatever he could to stop them from interfering. Hearing this hit a nerve and made Daria angrier. She clenched her fist and swore that over her dead body would she let the hermit get away with it this time. 2 days later, Alan left the village and returned to the hostel. He felt at peace. talking to his mom had been the right move. Now, he was ready, no fears, no doubts, just focused on the Academy of 1,000 Swords. But as soon as he arrived, he was surprisingly informed that he needed to do an interview before being admitted into the academy. Though unexpected, Alan went through with it. Days later, the letter of approval arrived. Because the director had told him he'd failed the interview, Alan was nervous about opening the envelope. He opened the envelope with shaking hands, and when he finally pulled the letter out, he was over the moon. He had been accepted into the academy. Alan had never imagined he could attend the famous Academy of 1,000 Swords. His dreams were finally coming true. Only a month ago, people made fun of him for being a failed swordsman. But now, everything had changed. He immediately rushed to tell Dora the good news. As soon as he reached the hostel, he told her he had been admitted and showed her the letter of acceptance. Dora read it and was thrilled. Instinctively, she gave Alan a playful punch with her strong hands, congratulated him, and said his mother would be proud. She also mentioned that they should celebrate by throwing a party in his honor. That night, Alan sent a letter to his mom, telling her the good news. That same night, Dora threw a small party to celebrate him. A few weeks later, Alan stood at the hostel's entrance, bags packed, and all set to leave for the academy. He bowed his head respectfully and thanked Dora for taking care of him for the past 3 years. But Dora brushed it off, telling him not to be so dramatic. She reminded him it wasn't like they were saying their final goodbyes and assured him they'd see each other again. Still, Alan couldn't help but thank her again. He remembered the first time they met, back when he had no money, not even 2 nickels to rub together. Yet Dora took him in and gave him a place to stay. Every day, she cooked delicious meals for him. Whenever he got into trouble, she was always there to help and comfort him. Hearing this made Dora emotional, and she nearly teared up, though she tried to stay strong. She told Alan to come back anytime he was hungry and promised she'd always give him whatever he needed. When Alan said it was time to begin his journey, Dora gave him a hard pat on the back. She said she didn't care whether the academy was called 1,000 Swords or 1,000,000 Swords. What mattered was that he never gave up. Alan assured her he wouldn't, and then bid her goodbye. Having graduated from fencing school, Alan was now on his way to becoming a student at the Academy of 1,000 Swords. He dashed toward the big city. After hours of running, he finally arrived at the capital. It didn't take him long to find the academy and locate the dormitory. Exhausted from running non-stop, he was also filled with excitement to begin this new chapter of his life. Inside the dorm, he found out that his room number was 501. Once he located the room and stepped inside, he was blown away by how big it was. He immediately found his school uniform and changed into it. It was a crisp jacket with a matching tie, and Alan looked like a total snack in it. On the bed, he also found a sword. He picked it up, unsheathed it, and was thrilled with how cool it looked. He loved everything about his new school. This was a new chapter in his life, one he was ready to dive into headfirst. Shortly afterward, Alan headed to the academy entrance ceremony. On the way, he saw a few other students also making their way there. Most of them were whispering and gossiping about 3 outstanding students who had gotten admitted into the academy without writing the entrance exam, but through recommendation. Alan felt a bit uneasy hearing this. He decided it would be best to keep it cool and never reveal he was one of those students who got in by recommendation. He didn't want to suffer the same way he did back at the fencing academy. He hated that time. So, this time around, Alan was determined to study, learn, and make friends. His intention was to live a normal life and connect with his classmates as much as possible. To do that, Alan decided to stay low-key and never reveal anything about his overpowered sword skill. He wanted to avoid the hate at all cost. As the entrance ceremony began, the host, Leia, immediately announced that there were 3 students who had joined the academy via recommendation. She listed their names: Ria Bastella, Rose Valencia, and lastly, our boy, Alan Rodal, then asked them to come up on stage. That was it. Alan's plan to stay low-key was dead before school even started. Everything had been going according to plan until that moment. Alan was heartbroken. His dream of living a normal student life was on the verge of collapsing. With no choice, Alan reluctantly stood from his seat. Shoulders slumped, head bowed, he made his way to the podium. As he climbed it, a female voice asked if he was depressed. Alan looked up and was shocked. It was Rose. She said it had been a while. When Alan demanded to know what she was doing in the academy, Rose simply said she decided to follow him there. With the 3 outstanding students now on stage, Leia asked them to introduce themselves to the crowd. state their names, previous schools, and share a few words with the other students. First was a Barbie who introduced herself as Ria Bastella, a student from a neighboring country called the Kingdom of Bastella. Ria pointed out that even though she came from a royal family, she was still just a freshman like everyone else. As Ria finished her speech, Alan was shocked to learn she was a princess. But looking at her, he had to admit, she definitely looked the part. Meanwhile, as Ria stepped back, the students were buzzing about her. One girl mentioned a rumor that Ria had shown incredible skill even as a youngster. The students were clearly impressed and felt she deserved the recommendation. Next was Rose. Her introduction was short and to the point. Just as she stepped down, the crowd buzzed again. One dude with a ridiculous mohawk practically squealed, amazed that the legendary bounty hunter was now a student at their academy. Finally, it was Alan's turn. He was more than nervous. His mind was racing, and he had no idea how to introduce himself. He was beyond anxious. He just wanted to escape the podium. He fought the urge to run. Then, finally, he summoned the courage and gave a painfully awkward introduction. Afterward, the crowd fell silent, just as Alan had expected. Then came the hateful remarks. One student mocked Alan's tiny frame, asking if his twig arms could even hold a sword. Another dude was furious, claiming Alan's recommendation was an insult to the entire entry process. Alan barely finished his introduction before his image was already in the gutter. He felt like his dream of a normal school life had just been publicly executed. After the entrance ceremony ended, Alan didn't wait a second. He fled the podium in shame and headed into the woods. As he walked deeper into the forest, he thought about how nothing had changed, no matter how hard he tried to fix how people saw him. He eventually found a decent terrain and decided to blow off some steam by practicing his sword techniques. After several slashes, Alan still didn't feel any better. He just felt more sad and lonely. His heart still hurt from the brutal embarrassment at the ceremony. Eventually, after practicing, he decided to return to his dorm. But since he was drenched in sweat, he figured he'd take a shower first. He opted for the public bath, and a few hours later, he arrived at the building. As he stepped inside, Alan was stunned that an entire building was dedicated just to bathing. Though the bathhouse was massive, he doubted it was big enough to wash away the humiliation he'd suffered. He opened the door to the men's dressing room, only to be hit with a visual that nearly knocked the soul out of him. Ria, completely exposed, plot armor out. Ria was just as shocked, but Alan was 10 times more mortified. He slammed the door shut and stammered out a panicked apology. As his brain spiraled in confusion, he couldn't understand why Ria was even in the men's dressing room. Then suddenly, the door creaked open. Ria slowly stepped out, her face red with embarrassment. Her hand clenched the wall so hard it cracked. She glared at Alan and challenged him to a duel. Alan was shocked when he heard the mention of a duel. Before he could say anything, Ria leaned forward and asked if he would accept the challenge. Alan froze. Then, with a shaky voice, Alan asked what the rules of the duel were. Ria thought for a moment, then said the rule was simple. The loser would become the winner's servant. She asked Alan if he was okay with that. Alan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was still shaking. Trying to calm things down, Alan apologized for seeing her underwear and explained it was an accident. But that only made Ria angrier. She tried to punch him in the face, but Alan moved out of the way. She told him she didn't care about his excuses. She only wanted to know if he would accept the duel or not. Seeing how angry Ria was, Alan panicked. He wasn't even sure when he agreed, but somehow the words had left his mouth. Suddenly, Leia popped out of nowhere and said she'd heard everything. Alan and Ria were shocked to see her, but before they could say a word, Leia announced that since they were going to duel, she would be the referee. Without warning, she grabbed them both by the neck and dragged them toward the arena. She told them to get started fast because there was no time to waste. When Leia asked if they were ready, Ria shouted that she was. Alan, who still didn't know how things got so crazy, said yes in a frustrated voice. With that, Leia gave the signal to start. Ria wasted no time summoning Fafnir, a primitive emperor dragon known for its powerful whirlwind of fire. Alan's eyes widened in shock to see Ria summoning her spiritual magic. Only a few gifted individuals with spiritual magic possess an innate ability to materialize the power within their souls. It was something Alan hadn't been able to achieve, even after 100 million years of training. Ria caught Alan staring with his mouth open and yelled at him to stop gawking and use his spirit magic too. Alan looked embarrassed and said he couldn't. Ria couldn't believe it. She asked if he was being dead serious, and Alan said yes. Rhea started laughing so hard she held her stomach. She told Alan that anyone who couldn't use spiritual magic was just a total beginner. Rhea immediately started looking down on Alan. She summoned all the fire in hell, leaving the devil without any, and said she was disgusted with his inability to use spiritual magic. Still, she gave Alan some credit for having the balls to battle her, but assured him the fight would be over in an instant. Meanwhile, Alan found it surprising that, despite Rhea's hot looks, her attitude was straight up nonsense. Alan knew he couldn't use spiritual magic like her, but he wasn't about to quit just yet. He was ready to fight to the end. Just then, Rhea cast a spell called White Dragon Scales and blasted Alan with white flames. However, Alan evaded the flames and tried to find an opening. Rhea noticed what Alan was doing and quickly summoned Black Dragon Breath, sending black flames rushing at him like a wave. But Alan rolled to the side just in time. That's when Alan realized something scary. Rhea could control both black and white dragon flames. If one didn't burn him, the other would. He had to be smart. He decided the only way not to get burned was to keep dodging and try to get close enough to land a strong hit. But when Alan tried to move in, Rhea didn't let him. She mixed the black and white flames together and shouted at him to stay away. The explosion nearly turned Alan to ashes, but at the last second, he jumped, flipping into the air, cutting through the blast with his sword, and neutralizing the flames. Rhea couldn't believe what she saw. She stopped the fight and asked what kind of trick Alan had just used. Alan landed with his sword in hand and said it was a move he had made up himself. Rhea was shocked but also impressed. She praised his sincere dedication to the art of the sword and acknowledged the rigorous training he must have endured. But then she stood tall and said that no matter how much Alan trained, he could never reach her level. She rushed toward Alan with fire in her eyes and told him that there would always be a big gap between someone like her and someone like him, someone with no talent. Rhea attacked Alan and unleashed a series of coordinated strikes. Alan struggled to block them all, but her attacks just kept coming, wave after wave, forcing him to stay on the defensive. Then suddenly, Alan slipped during one strike. Rhea didn't hesitate. She saw the opening, took it, and landed a solid kick straight to Alan's stomach. Alan collapsed to the ground but managed to get back up just in time. Even though it was hard to admit, Rhea had to acknowledge that when it came to a normal sword fight, Alan was better than her. But then she laughed and told Alan that with her immense power from the spiritual garment, even his sword skills were useless against her. Alan figured she was telling the truth. The combination of her fencing and spiritual garment clearly gave Rhea a solid advantage. But then, Alan noticed a flaw in her fighting style. She relied too much on the power of the spiritual garment and had neglected her swordsmanship. And worse, her ego made her reckless. She left openings when she got too confident. Alan was determined to use those weaknesses to his advantage. But first, he had to predict her every move. He noticed Rhea was playing it safe, using a disciplined and effective fighting style known as the Hayuru style. Alan was confident she'd use it again. This was the moment everything would be decided. Alan was ready for the next attack. Rhea, confident that this time she'd end the fight, charged at him again using the same Hayuru style. But Alan just smiled. Rhea had fallen right into his trap, exactly as he predicted. In a flash, Alan activated a sword technique known as Hazy Moon. Electricity sparked through the air as the trap triggered. Rhea was caught completely off guard, electrocuted on the spot, and collapsed instantly. Just like that, the duel was over. Leia immediately walked over to Alan and declared him the winner. As she began to praise him for his strength, Alan stopped her and said they needed to get Rhea to the infirmary. However, Leia assured him that Rhea was unusually resilient and would definitely wake up soon. As predicted, Rhea suddenly jolted back to consciousness in shock. She was confused and demanded to know what had happened. When Leia told her she had lost, Rhea couldn't believe it. She immediately stormed toward Alan and angrily demanded to know what the heck he did to her. Alan calmly explained that it was a stationary cut, a predictive strike. He clarified that he calculated exactly where she would move and set the blade in advance. The moment she passed through, the technique activated, and it was already too late. Rhea was furious. She started ranting about how unfair it was. But then Leia cleared her throat, stopping Rhea's rambling. Leia reminded her that the duel ended with Alan's victory and asked what Rhea planned to do about it. Rhea was confused and asked what she meant. Leia reminded her of the promise made before the duel. Rhea's face went pale. She remembered and panicked. When Leia repeated that the loser would become the winner's slave, Rhea froze in shock and stammered that she didn't actually mean it. She protested that it was just a rhetorical statement. Leia shrugged and acknowledged that the duel wasn't even conducted formally. Leia pointed out that if Rhea insisted the promise wasn't real, they could just pretend the duel never happened. Alan, to his credit, was fine with that. He didn't want rumors spreading that the Princess of Vysteria had been enslaved by a foreigner. But then Leia asked if that was really what Rhea wanted. When Rhea demanded to know what she meant, Leia pointed out that, as the princess of the great kingdom of Vysteria, it wouldn't look good to dodge a punishment she herself had proposed. This really hit Rhea hard, so she cried and vowed to keep her word. She turned and looked at Alan angrily before bowing and agreeing to be under his care as his slave. She then called Alan master, but her face turned red instantly from sheer embarrassment. A few hours later, the unthinkable had happened. Alan was now living in Rhea's room. How did that even happen? Turns out that after the duel, once they returned to the dorm, Leia instructed Rhea to give her master everything he needed and treat him well. As a result, she asked Alan to move into Rhea's room and promised his belongings would be transferred the next day. Alan was completely uncomfortable with the situation. The fact that the princess of a whole nation had become his slave and was now living alone with him made it even worse. He could only imagine what the kingdom of Vysteria would do when they found out. It was a confusing situation for Alan, knowing that from now on, he had to live with Rhea. Meanwhile, on her way back to the teacher's staff room, Leia couldn't stop laughing. She found the whole situation hilarious, and the expression on Rhea's face was priceless. Totally a fun moment. Then an idea struck her. Leia figured it was time to put the 3 top students' talents to good use. The school needed strong representatives for the Big 5 holy days, and she just found her team. In the meantime, there was a lot of tension inside Rhea's room. Neither Alan nor Rhea said a word to each other. Alan sighed in frustration. He thought about everything that had happened and felt that Leia, as the supervisor, hadn't handled the situation very well. But then again, there wasn't much Leia could do, because in a duel, a swordsman's honor is at stake. Both parties decide on a promise beforehand, and under no circumstances should that promise be altered. Alan recalled that it was the same situation during his duel with Doriel. Once he came out as the winner, Doriel kept his word and apologized. So once the rules are set and the promises made, it becomes extremely difficult to break them. Since a swordsman never breaks a promise, Alan now found himself stuck in this awkward mess. He knew that even if he proposed to break the slavery agreement, as a true swordsman, Rhea would never accept it. The only way to cancel the contract was for Rhea to defeat him in a duel. Alan considered maybe throwing the fight and letting Rhea win just to get out of the situation. But he quickly dismissed that idea. It would damage his reputation as a swordsman, and besides, it would be a stupid reason to lose on purpose. Just then, he noticed Rhea's shirt was torn. Not only that, Alan quickly turned his face away when he realized that, because of the tear, he could see her melon cover. He considered mentioning the awkward situation, but had no idea how to bring it up, so he just dismissed the thought. Alan looked around Rhea's room and noted that it was pretty nice. He also noticed that Rhea seemed to really like stuffed animals, like the cute teddy bear on her bed. But something felt off. Since Rhea was royalty, Alan expected her room to be more luxurious. Instead, it was just normal, fitting for a girl her age. Suddenly, Rhea broke the awkward silence. She shouted, asking Alan not to look around her room so much because she found it embarrassing. Alan immediately apologized and figured this was the perfect opportunity to help her cover up. He quickly took off his jacket and handed it to her, asking her to cover herself. Rhea was shocked at first, but Alan explained that due to the earlier attack, the front of her uniform had been torn. He suggested she use his jacket in the meantime. Rhea instantly got flustered upon realizing the state of her uniform. Embarrassed, she took the jacket from Alan and shyly thanked him. Alan then suggested they drop the whole formal speech thing, but Rhea insisted on continuing to use formal language. As his slave, she felt it was strange not to. She also pointed out that, as a swordsman, she still had her pride and will, and the last thing she would ever do was go back on her promise, just as Alan predicted. He had always guessed that as a swordsman, Rhea would never go against the rules of a duel. It was her pride. With that, Alan decided the best thing to do was just accept the situation and try to get along with Rhea. He figured that by doing so, he might even be able to ask her to teach him how to manifest spiritual magic. So, he decided to play along. As her master, Alan gave Rhea her first command. From that moment on, she was forbidden from using formal language with him. Rhea was shocked, but she agreed. However, she asked if she could also take back an order. Alan told her she could. In that case, Rhea ordered Alan to stop using formal language with her, too. Alan thought about it for a moment and then accepted. After that, Alan started complaining about how he had just gotten to school and everything was already a mess. In response, Rhea told him he had no one to blame but himself. Alan agreed she had a point, but he also pointed out that she was at fault for changing in the male dressing room. Rhea was confused. She was certain she'd been in the girls' dressing room. That's when it all clicked for her. She realized that everything had been planned by Leia. Later, as night fell, Rhea mentioned that it was time for her to get some sleep. Alan innocently suggested she take a bath first before going to bed. That made Rhea a bit flustered. She called Alan a degenerate before reluctantly agreeing. As she headed to the bathroom, she warned Alan not to spy on her like last time, and threatened that she wouldn't forgive him if he did. Inside the bathroom, Rhea was fuming as she undressed. She thought the only reason Alan had told her to take a bath was because of his cultured mind, and that it was all a trap to peek at her with no clothes on. She immediately checked if the curtains were transparent before finally removing her plot armor. Then, she stepped into the shower to wash off all the sweat and dirt. Meanwhile, Alan decided to work out his muscles while Rhea bathed. How would this living condition between Alan and Rhea turn out? Comment "The Perfect Swordsman" if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.